this is our 6th school Adequate Public Facilities work group meeting, and we have about 12 or 15 people in the work group, and obviously a much larger group. We've been letting a variety of different folks who we thought might have some interest into listening in today. A couple housekeeping things. We are going to record this, so we will have access to Jason's presentation for those who couldn't be here and the questions that follow. What I would ask in general is we try and keep our questions from the work group. I think it's okay if you want to type in on a chat and ask something, but we don't want to lose focus that this is a work group meeting that we're allowing a lot of other participants to observe. So for our 6th meeting, what we typically do in the beginning is, and we're not going to go do introductions just because the volume of people, it will be difficult to get through that. We just do a quick recap of our previous meeting. Meeting number 5, the things that came back as discussion items is which discusses in great deal capacity and space formulas and the current student yield rate. So that was what we covered in our last meeting. And I think one of the conclusions that we're drawing after 5 meetings is that the potential changes that this group could recommend be made to the school APF system are pretty marginal. And we came across information that was coming out of Jason's group in Montgomery County over the last few months, and we've had several discussions with he and Montgomery County folks, Howard County folks. Uri Avon, many of you know, has been involved in this. And at our last meeting, this group decided that we wanted to invite Jason in to give a presentation of what they used to call the subdivision staging policy, which I understand now has been renamed the growth and infrastructure policy. So what I'd like to do is introduce Jason Sartori, if I'm pronouncing it right, Jason? Sure. Sartori?
Yep.
And just if you don't have agendas in front of you, we listed basically a short bio from him. I'm going to read it just real quick. Jason is the Chief of Countywide Planning and Policy Division, which focuses on Montgomery County's countywide planning efforts, including transportation planning, transportation networks, modeling, public infrastructure, adequacy monitoring, including schools, housing policy, historic preservation, zoning, and environmental resources. Jason joined the department in 2016 to help lead and update to the county's growth policy, the subdivisions, including the subdivision staging policy. Since that time, he's worked with each area team to support master plan efforts, as well as the review of development applications to ensure adequate public facilities. Jason previously served as the Associate Director of the National Center for Smart Growth at the University of Maryland, and while there, he led numerous projects relating to affordable housing, transportation modeling, opportunity accessibility, metrics, economic development, and growth visioning and scenario evaluation. Jason was also the project manager for all 4 Makeover Montgomery planning conferences. He's fresh off leading the planning board in Montgomery County Council through a 17-month effort to once again update the county's subdivision staging policy, which has resulted in a more data-informed, context-sensitive policy. And if I understand, if I recall, it was early this week that the Montgomery County Council approved 7-0 to move forward with this new process. And that's pretty amazing, because I think folks are going to hear what Jason and his group have developed is a sea change from the way we think APF works. For the purposes of today, we're concentrating on school APF, but Jason's work, as I indicated, delves into transportation and anything related to adequate public facility. There's also going to be a discussion of the financing that goes with it, and that includes impact fees. So one of the things I think that's important for this group is we have produced a draft GDP. We've closed the window for the initial set of comments. We are developing changes to that policy document that we will talk about school APF in more depth. But we're also in the process of writing an RFP to update our impact fees and to perform a fiscal impact analysis. Those 2 fiscal studies have not occurred in Anne Arundel County since 2009. They're both out of date, the data is antiquated, and the results aren't producing the results that we want. So Anne Arundel County is in I think, a really unique place with our opportunity opportunity with the GDP, with school APF, with impact fees, and fiscal impact analysis to kind of overhaul our systems if we choose to do that. So without further ado, Jason?
Great. Thank you, Steve. It's really great to be here, and it's good to see some of you guys. Some of you I've worked with years ago through my work with the Center for Smart Growth and some of our statewide initiatives and things that we worked on there. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to talk to you about the work that we've been doing in Montgomery County and how it might be applicable to what you guys are tackling in Arundel. And I will tell you that a lot of the things that I've been hearing from Steve and from other folks, it's all very similar from numerous perspectives, and I think that you'll see that in the conversation that we have today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Great. Okay. So as Steve mentioned, the new name for this policy is our growth and infrastructure policy, and I'll just take a second to kind of give you a brief history, and then get into some of the data that we've worked on and that helped kind of inform this scope of that of our update. The one thing we really wanted to make sure that we did with this update was we wanted it to be based largely on data and an understanding of what is driving, in particular as we talk about schools, what is driving enrollment growth in our county schools, and how does that enrollment growth, how does it relate to the different development patterns that we're seeing, or the type of development and the amount of development that we're seeing in different parts of the county. So we wanted it to be data driven. We also wanted it to be stakeholder informed, and so we tried to really engage. I mean, a lot of this, as many of you know, it gets into the weeds of like data analysis or the very detailed policy. But we have plenty of people in our county who want to engage in that conversation at that level, and we had that engagement, and we really wanted to make sure that we reached out to as many people as possible and had that conversation at those levels. And the other thing we said was that we are not going to let any part of this policy be too sacred to touch. We were willing to look at all aspects of the policy and make changes to any part of it that we thought may not be applicable given the current growth context that the county is in. And part of that is that when the policy, when the APFO was adopted in 1973, the county was growing very differently than we are today. At that time, it was largely greenfield development and in areas where we didn't have any infrastructure at all. And today, we are seeing much more infill and redevelopment in areas where we have infrastructure that just may not be adequate, that may not be sufficient for the intensity of development that we have. And when I say development, I don't necessarily mean new development, but existing, housing. So, and so we did want to apply also a more context-sensitive approach. We wanted to be able to, using that data, to be able to say, we know we're not growing the same way in every single part of the county, and so let's really be more sensitive to that. And with regard to schools, we also wanted to make sure that we, again, focus within the current growth paradigm, not in the old paradigm. And on the transportation side, and I'm not going to really talk about the transportation today, but I would say we wanted to incorporate more Vision Zero concepts into the way we evaluate the adequacy of our infrastructure. So this is what we did, what we looked to do.
Jason, before you move on,
sure.
Let me just jump in. We have a question.
Okay.
Was there citizen opposition to the new APF policy, and if so, how was it addressed?
Sure. So part of this is, and when I say it's been a 17-month process, it's almost a never-ending process, right? We're constantly engaging with folks on the issues related to this policy continuously, right? And it's and so we've been talking with folks from our parent community, the county council of PTAs, and we've been talking to folks in the development industry and talking to neighborhood groups really almost, it seems like forever, about certain aspects of this policy and debating them. And so in order to, yes, there was opposition to certain aspects of it, but it was interesting when we had our public hearings, there was really no one that came out and said this whole thing is horrible and needs to all be thrown away, right? Everyone had issues with certain aspects of it. And so, to a certain extent, we felt like we had done a pretty decent job. If no one was particularly, happy with the entire thing, but no one was also upset about everything. And so we felt that the way we approached it and the process that we followed kind of helped bring more people along to a common goal, or at least to a common understanding of what we were dealing with and what we were working with. And so I'll talk a little bit about that process, where I think that it helped really secure the confidence of our elected officials that that we were moving in the right direction, given that they were hearing feedback from all different groups that were supportive of many different aspects of what we had proposed. So one thing we did that we had not done in the past, for the past several times that we've done this update, we've had a transportation advisory panel. And I call it advisory panel, but it's a very technical team, right? That they're looking at very technical aspects of the transportation review that we do. We had never had one on the school side. So on the transportation side, we'll bring in consultants to help out with that, but we were always doing everything internally. And unfortunately, a lot of times that comes across to the community as, like a black box type of thing, where we've created something and we've just put it out there and we don't really fully engage the community in the crafting of the policy. But also what we thought was important before we started talking policy was in an interpretation of the data. And so we pulled together what we called our Schools Technical Advisory Team, which or called it STAT for short. And when we sought participation in that, we really made it clear that we were looking for people who were willing and interested in diving into data, and then to be able to also take the interpretations of those data and be able to then talk about policy. And so we met with them 6 times. We did 2.5 to 3 hour meetings with them each time. And the first 3 were very heavily focused on the data that we had uncovered. And we would spend each subsequent meeting, sometimes up to half of that next meeting, circling back on questions that had come up at the previous meeting for additional data or additional ways of looking at it and understanding it, and really debating and discussing what we were looking at. And then we spent the last 3 meetings kind of guiding, conversations around, well, how do we incorporate these data into some of our potential policy recommendations? We made it clear to this group that the recommendations were not coming from this group. They were coming from planning staff, but we were using what we were hearing from this group to instruct and inform our decisions and our recommendations. And the group consisted of about 25 people, community members, parent community, developers, real estate folks, land use attorneys, different civic organizations, and people. We wanted to make sure we also had representation from different parts of the county. We then also we held one large community kickoff workshop that we had about 65 people or so participate in. And in all of these, I will tell you that we started that off with a presentation of about 30-minute presentation of a bunch of different data that kind of talked about here's what growth means in the county today and what it looks like. And so that was, kind of underpinning the conversations that took place at that workshop. We did the same thing at 5 different roundtable discussions that we held. And then I think this might have been more, but I pulled this together real quickly at the end. I think we did 4 planning board briefings as we were going along, just giving them updates on what we were finding. And then we had 6 planning board work sessions. We held 2 public hearings, one before the planning board, one before the county council. and what ultimately became 18 council work sessions from the middle of September through last Friday. And that includes committee work sessions. Ultimately, what we recommended through the planning board was not just one policy. So this growth and infrastructure policy is adopted through a resolution. So we sent over a draft resolution that kind of incorporated all of this policy. But then it was a package that included 3 separate bills. One of the bills was related to the impact taxes that we charge on schools and transportation, and another bill related to the recordation tax on the transfer tax on the sale of real property. And so we sent that complete package over, and so that's why, in part, why it required 18 different work sessions. We had over, I think, 45 different recommendations in what we sent over. Altogether, about 17 months of effort.